Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve in the latest trends in enterprise tech? Look no further than the Breaking Analysis podcast with Dave Vellante. This data-driven program dives into the most important topics facing the enterprise tech industry today. With a data-first approach that leverages ETR's renowned surveys of IT decision-makers and insight from the CUBE community, Breaking Analysis delivers in-depth research on the most important topics facing technologists and IT buyers. Whether you're a business leader, an IT professional, investor, or just an avid follower of the industry, this podcast is a must-listen. Just search Breaking Analysis Podcast wherever you get your podcast and tune in today to stay ahead of the game in enterprise tech.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. We are getting towards the very end of January, all the way through the 1st January of 2024. You know, the year is 1/12 done. So hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's getting reacclimated in the new year. Hopefully things are going well, whether it's work or health or family. And another Sunday Perspective show. I'm actually recording this one in Europe. I am in the middle of a about 4-week world tour for the day job. So spent some time in Asia last week. I am just starting the European leg of the tour. We'll be back in the United States doing a week there on the road and then down in South America. So apologize if the audio quality of this one is slightly different. Didn't bring my big podcast recording microphone, although I think the room that I'm in is pretty good for audio quality. So hopefully it's okay. Just using AirPods this time, and we'll see how it goes. Hopefully we can clean it up if it's a little tinny or a little bit different than usual. But part of what I've been doing on this roadshow a lot is talking about AI and talking to a lot of different companies about how they are thinking about AI, how they're thinking about adopting AI. And it's been kind of an eye-opening experience. Anytime you get out a chance to talk to a lot of different businesses, you realize that there are, there's usually a big gap between what is in the headlines, what's in the news, maybe what's in Reddit or Hacker News or Twitter or X or anywhere that is sort of, kind of bleeding edge of what's out there, how adopted new technologies are. And so it's been interesting to, just kind of get a sense of the spectrum of where companies are in terms of their AI adoption, what they're thinking about. Maybe adoption is not even the best starting place. It's where are they right now in terms of thinking about it? What have they done in the past? What's been successful? What's failed? How well educated are they with sort of some of the newer things that are going on, whether it's, generative AI or, new tools or new APIs. And one of the things, I was reading an article this week in kind of an unusual place. It was in Forbes. It was called Harnessing AI's Full Potential for Enterprise Adoption. And Forbes isn't necessarily known anymore for being much of a place for technology advice or guidance. But they do a decent job of kind of high level, more business level thinking about how to, just process new technology. How do you think about it? How could it potentially be useful to your business? Obviously, their readers are far less technical maybe than listen to this show, much more business focused. But I got to reading this article and I thought it was kind of a good intersection between these conversations that I was having out with the marketplace over the last few weeks and expect to have over the next month or so, but also just kind of the framework of, what the business community might be reading about this new technology. Because it's, we are most definitely at the beginning of, what will be the new AI era. And, it's foolish to argue that maybe we're not in the AI era because obviously it's been around for a very long time. But now that it's become something that is so easy to get access to and so easy to kind of, at least in various ways, for anybody to use, anybody to interface with, anybody to sort of get immediate results from, again, in different ways. It really becomes sort of the era of AI because the discussion now becomes available and feasible for nearly everybody, for nearly anybody, for nearly everybody, at fairly low cost, at a very simple on-ramp, very simple user interface, at least for, again, a subset of applications. And so I thought it would be interesting to sort of explore this intersection of, where people are in the marketplace, kind of what they're thinking is their education, and then using this framework, this sort of 5-point framework that they have in this article, to sort of talk through, how this might be applicable to your business. So I'm going to kind of dig into that after the break.
Today's episode of the Cloudcast is sponsored by Datadog, a real-time monitoring platform that unifies metrics, traces, and logs into one tightly integrated platform. Datadog APM empowers developer teams to identify anomalies, resolve issues, and improve application performance. Begin collecting stack traces, visualizing them as flame graphs, organizing them into profile types such as CPU, I/O, and more. Teams can search for specific profiles, correlate them with distributed traces, and identify slow or underperforming code for analysis and optimization. Plus, with Datadog APM Live Search, you can perform searches across the full stream of ingested traces generated by your application over the last 15 minutes. Try Datadog APM free with a 14-day trial, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Visit datadog.com/APM-Cloudcast to get started. That's datadog.com/APM-Cloudcast.
And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to kind of dig into this framework that was written up in an article in Forbes and kind of cross-reference it to a bunch of discussions that I've been having with the marketplace, just a lot of different companies as they're kind of exploring their AI journey, if you will. And, the sort of 5 points that were in this article, the way they lay them out, again, I don't know if the order necessarily matters, but, the first one was aligning AI strategy with business goals. Obviously, important to make sure that the technology investments you're making align to the business goals you have. A good starting point. Second was cultivating an AI-friendly culture. This could mean a lot of different things. Culture can mean a lot of different things to businesses, but obviously AI is going to be a technology that has a lot of possibilities, potentially has a lot of concerns for people. The costs of how you will implement it will vary based on what you're trying to do. Having a culture within your company that is understanding of AI, is educated about AI, understands both the pros and cons will be very important, as we've seen with every sort of technology/culture change that comes into a business. Oftentimes, the culture, the people can be the biggest hindrance and so forth. Third was skills and expertise. So obviously, this gets into do you have in-house skills? For example, does your business have an existing data science team? Does your business have an existing culture of experimentation? So this is really going to get into, the typical, this is a new set of technologies. How well is your existing technology team able to kind of ramp up and understand this and deploy this? Do you need to bring in a new set of skills to do this? Is this something you can augment with, systems integrator type of companies or, local, technical kind of partner kind of companies? This is not a unique thing. This is something we see with every new technology that gets adopted into the business. How do you train people? How do you invest in their skill set? How do you keep them around? The fourth one was ethics and trust. So this is probably going to be the most complicated part of this, as we get into which models are used, where did the data in these models come from, how were they trained, what were the weights and biases that got into there, and then as various models output something, whether it's a chat GPT, large language model type of situation, or some other model that maybe it's looking at fraud detection, whatever it might be. How do I trust the results of those things? Are there things that we can do to identify where the information came from? So maybe it gives people a secondary thing to go look at and figure out, or is the expectation, the experience of the application essentially blind trust that it will just hopefully be right. And we'll get into sort of, what the ramifications of that are. And then finally, the last piece was data management protection. So this obviously gets into a certain amount of, what are the sources of your data? How do you do the sort of cleaning and, preparation of data in order to get it into models? Are you building models yourself? Are you using pre-built models? So you're pulling things from Hugging Face, or using OpenAI, or using Bard and Gemini, or whatever's out there. So a lot about where does the data come from? How was it prepared? What is the model that's being used? And then data protection, obviously gets into various kinds of things of standard just kind of DR types of things, backup and DR, but also gets into, how are you protecting yourself from, when you get into certain patterns for these AI applications, whether it's retrieval augmented generation or something else, how do you protect yourself such that your models don't become corrupted with data that you're not familiar with, or you don't really know where it came from, or you don't know the patterns that were kind of pushed into the model and so forth. So I thought it'd be useful to kind of walk through these 5 different things and look at both the pros and cons, or just various things that people should kind of be aware of within these things. Because I think in general, it's a good general framework for thinking about how might a business go about adopting AI, and you probably could just apply this to a lot of how would they adopt new technology. But I think given the potential impact of AI, potentially both positive and negatively at businesses, it's a good starting framework. And then obviously as your business decides to use AI, becomes more mature in how to use it, more mature with the use of the technology, you'll obviously adapt these types of models as they apply. So let's start with the first one, aligning AI strategy with business goals. So, on the surface, this is a very simple thing. Hey, you shouldn't necessarily be spending money on technology unless there is a business purpose for it, right? So is the business purpose to reduce cost? Is it to drive productivity of some aspect of your system? Is it to improve the experience? Maybe you are able to, return responses and give answers to whatever you're trying to do 10 times as fast. Maybe you're able to process, X amount more information or tasks or transactions or whatever that you were in the past, whatever that might be. Are you trying to create a differentiation in your business? Are you trying to create a differentiation in the marketplace by being ahead of your customers or ahead of your competitors by doing something by using AI? So I think that's sort of the first thing. And you're going to hear, this is where the vendor marketplace or the community marketplaces tend to always sort of oftentimes look at the biggest problem, the most complicated problem. You should write some new application. You should modernize your applications. You should, whatever it might be. And, this is where it might be worthwhile to start aligning kind of, what is low-hanging fruit? What are the things that sort of fit in those categories? Cost savings, productivity, new user experiences, differentiation of the business. Because, depending on your skill set, depending on your expertise in this space, depending on what investments you've made in this before, you may not necessarily be equipped at this point in time to handle those higher order types of things, the things that differentiate your business or truly create a different experience. But it might be very easy for you to, just look at your workforce and say, look, we're not going to be able to hire any more people this year. We're kind of, trying to keep costs under control. But if we could augment them by 30% or 20% or 50% or something, we could make an investment in, some sort of productivity type of tool to help them, right? So this is where I think, again, maybe the easiest 4 categories to think about are kind of cost reduction with some sort of AI, productivity improvements with some sort of AI, changing the user experience, sort of the market experience, your partner's experience, or creating some differentiated thing within the business, and then figure out where does technology best apply to what you're capable of doing, what's maybe easily or readily available for you, and going from there. Okay. Second thing, cultivating an AI-friendly culture. So this is going to be a really interesting one because to a certain extent, this is first and foremost sort of steeped in the idea of, do you have a business that has an existing culture of experimentation, right? Because as much as we see all sorts of things with AI, you have to, in order to get success with it, in order to understand how to use it properly, in order to, get the types of results that you want, whether you are, just doing, normal kind of chat GPT stuff, you're trying to augment, getting your developers to, kind of have co-pilot types of things. You are letting your marketing teams, do a bunch of, creative types of things with, Canvas and, Stable Diffusion or whatever it might be. You have to understand that they're going to have a learning curve. They're going to create things, or they may, input stuff into systems, and it doesn't always give you exact answers, right? It gives you sort of ballpark answers. And so, depending on how rigid your business is in measuring things, in accounting for things, you need to have a sense of how well are we going to be flexible with experimentation. Just because a lot of this stuff is new, because people aren't exactly sure what the outputs are going to look like yet. And obviously we've seen, various cases of really interesting, successful stuff. And we've also seen cases where, these, for example, large language models will have hallucinations and give wrong answers. And so, you have to figure out what your culture or your business will accept in terms of how can we experiment with these things? How can we deal with different outputs? How can we deal with different interactions? And what level of okay can we be with that, right? And there isn't one answer, right? Some businesses are more innovation driven. Some are going to be more sort of regulation driven. Some are going to have very small budgets. Others will have very high budgets to be able to experiment. But this is an area where I think you really need to kind of work through what that looks like. The second thing is, AI is going to be one of these things where it's still very, very early days. And this is where you have to look at, how collaborative is your business? How collaborative, either within a group or cross-functionally across groups, is your business today? Because, the learning curve with AI is one that might be short in some types of use cases and things, and it could be very long in others. And obviously the thing that you'd like to do is try and reduce the learning curve, reduce the pain and sort of, errors from, the learning curves. And so, looking at how well do you accept, or do you foster collaboration so that, if you've got multiple groups in your organization that are doing similar types of things, how well are they sharing stuff, right? And then the third thing that you're really going to have to figure out is, and this is going to kind of overlap with stuff like data management and ethics and trust and so forth, is how much freedom are you going to give your organization to go out and experiment, right? How much do you let them use external tools? How much do you require that they only can use internal tools? How do you educate them about what type of data to use with the tools that they're working with? How much access do you give them to the data? All those sort of things. So I think it's really kind of three things. It's how well do you deal with experimentation? How well do you deal with collaboration? And then, how well do you deal with sort of guidance as far as, kind of self-regulating yourself and, kind of determining what you're going to allow versus what you don't allow, right? And again, some of these are kind of specific to AI, and some of these are, you could go, boy, this sounds a lot like when, IT first allowed people to go out and find their own SaaS applications or, pay for their own IT services and so forth. Okay. Third thing on the list, skills and expertise. Again, this really goes back to, what are you trying to do, right? This skills and expertise is very much going to align with, strategy, the aligning AI with business. So, the first question you probably have to ask yourself is, do we have an existing data science team? Has AI been part of what we've done somewhere in the business such that, we have a starting point we can use? Or, are you starting relatively from scratch and you're looking at some new things? And so, this is where you are, you have to figure out, can you reuse existing skills? So, for example, do you have existing data science teams that, if nothing else, can educate new groups, can share their best practices, can share their tools, and so forth? The other thing that you're probably going to want to be looking at is, how can you augment your experience? And I'll say this from having lived through multiple eras, multiple trends of new stuff. I think the companies that will admit early on when they are not prepared, right? So let me rephrase that. That was a bad way of saying it. There are lots of companies who will look at some of these new technologies and go, I want that. We would benefit from that. And oftentimes what I find is, if you happen to be blessed with a great internal team that picks it up and has early success and is able to run with it, that's fantastic, right? Like that's sort of a best case scenario. You don't have to reinvest in new things. But that's very rarely happens. What tends to happen is you find teams that are excited about being able to work on something new, right? New is, kind of the oxygen of the tech community, the tech world. But unfortunately, they have to go through a long learning period. And they'll oftentimes go, well, I don't want to ask for outside help because I don't want someone to come in and stifle my innovation or stifle my creativity. But what I found is successful is as soon as you get to where you sort of think you know what you want to do, but you also realize like, this is going to take a while for us to figure out. It's great. And again, it doesn't have to be a permanent thing. It's great to bring in somebody, some team, some organization to help you accelerate to that first success or second success, because that's the thing, that first and second success of a new project is the thing that allows you to gain momentum, to continue to have the project funded, to have people believe that what you're working on will bear fruit. And I've found too often that, you can compare a team that brought in outside help early and, they can use it as consulting types of things or adjacent to what they do or whatever they do versus the teams that said, I don't need help. We're good. We're going to figure this out. We have smart people. And they don't have sort of immediate success. It just sort of lingers on, and they sort of have failure after failure, but they feel like they're learning something. The velocity between those two over the first 12 to 18 months is significantly different. So my biggest thing I would say is once you kind of get through the first couple of checklists of we identified what the business need is, we sort of have a culture in which we're going to accept that this is going to be a path we go down. Go and find some sort of augmentation to the skills you have if you don't happen to have, world-class skills already, right? If you have a good team and they're capable, but you want to sort of accelerate it so that you can continue to drive interest in the projects you're working on, the outputs that you're working on across the company, don't be afraid to sort of ask for help, I guess is maybe the best advice that I've seen. And again, I've seen it across, multiple technology trends, multiple technology eras. There's always a big gap between those who ask for help and those who kind of struggle for a long time, especially at the 12-month to 18-month period once they look back at how far they've come. Now, fourth thing on the list, ethics and trust. This is going to be the hardest thing to figure out and measure, right? Ultimately, this gets into, biases, whether they are human biases that are built into the models, data biases that are built into the models, and the reason you want to look at this stuff is because the last thing you want to have happen is you build this powerful new AI system, you build this new application, you're really proud of it, and you don't understand the way that it can become biased or it's inherently biased. And, the output of that could mean that you disenfranchise some of your customers because of the way that the system talks to them. Maybe it speaks to them in an inappropriate manner, or it can be easily influenced by, community having access to it. It might make decisions that aren't necessarily aligned to your company's culture or a culture. You may have to think about, okay, we're deploying this in the United States, in Asia, in Africa, in South America, and just the local cultures of those aren't necessarily going to be the same, right? The expectations are different, cultural norms are different, who the end users are going to be different, all the things that we sort of know. The AI systems, because they are this sort of mix and match of lots of data, but some sort of human input, this is going to be the hardest thing for teams to kind of figure out how to measure, how to control, how to adjust to them. And this is where the further along you go in your process, you're going to have to be thinking of, do we have ways to track this? What do we do if a problem arises, right? And again, this is one of those scenarios that the problems could be very small or they could be widespread, right? It could be as simple as, if you think of it from a trust perspective, do I trust the end result that comes out? Do I do the most basic things like, for example, if I'm using a large language model, Do I tell you where the results came from, right? Do I put some sort of notation like you would see in a book or a scientific report or something that says, yes, this was the statement that was made, and this is where the source of where that came from is, so that the user has some way of kind of secondarily verifying stuff. The ethics stuff, you have to think of it in terms of, how do I monitor this? Is there some way to measure this? But then you're also going to have to think about this, and the kind of the example that always gets used are these chatbots that get put out there into public forums, and enough people interact with them in bad ways, and all of a sudden they are spitting out, racist propaganda or Nazi propaganda or some religious thing that's offensive to people, whatever it might be. That's almost, you have to think about that in the context of, what would I do if that happened? Do I have a way of shutting the system down? Do I have a way of, dealing with the negative ramifications that come out of that? And it's very similar to, let's say you ran a stadium for a sporting event, and somehow you have the greatest supplier in the world, but, somehow they had a tainted batch of a drink or a food, and all of a sudden, big swath of the population at the stadium for the game is getting sick, right? What do you do in that situation? It wasn't what you intended to do. You thought you had taken care of, your sources, your suppliers, and so forth. You thought your system was well designed, and you probably did all those things. But what do you do if something goes bad? And so those are the kind of things that you're going to have to think about. And I think we'll see more and more tools put in place, examples put in place, best practices put in place. But we're still at a really, really early stage, especially as these systems go from being kind of niche for certain parts of the business to potentially being used all over the business. You're going to have to think through these things. And this is where, you may end up having to hire the skill set to help you make sure that the ethics and trust is well defined. It all is going to depend on, where is the application being used? Who's going to interact with the application? How well can you control that? How well does it, how much is it different from one region to another, from one user base to another, from one application to another? So that's going to be the most complicated one, because again, it's not sort of cut and dry. It's not sort of binary. It's, it works or it doesn't work. And then the last thing on the list, data management and protection. This sort of goes hand in hand with ethics and trust. It also sort of goes hand in hand with skills and expertise. And this ultimately gets into looking at the models that are being used. Where are the models coming from? So, this is where we'll have, at the most basic level, are the models that you're interacting with in some way, are they proprietary and fully sort of, kind of a black box? Are they open in some way, fully open source or partially open source? Lots of different things are emerging in that space. Are there ways of looking at what data impacted the models, created the models, was the weights and biases of how the model was built, and so forth? So you're going to want to be thinking about that the same way that you think about, how you get your software. Where did the software come from? Does it have bugs? Sort of software supply chain. This is sort of software supply chain for models and so forth. And then the second thing you want to think about is, how do you protect the data? Where's the sources of the data that potentially are going to be used to augment these models? And then as you're building your models, obviously you want to use, normal standard data protection types of things, to keep them safe, keep them from getting attacked or modified. But also, just if your business becomes more and more dependent on any given application that has an AI tie to it, the models become, essentially like the database of those applications. So you want to protect them in the exact same ways and maybe even more advanced ways than you do today for, a critical, a system that has data and database and so forth. So anyways, I tried to walk through some of those things. I think, again, for any given company, there is just a huge wide spectrum of, have they thought through these things? Have they, how are they educating both their leaders from a business perspective, as well as their technicians and their technical people, to understand, where do those two things come together? What's possible? And so I think this framework it's a good way to think about the breadth of things that companies need to think about. It's in no way 100% complete, but I think it's a good, simple framework for thinking about, again, the interaction of technology in business. How well is your internal culture of your business, or your culture of interacting with your customers and your partners and your marketplace? How well equipped are you to deal with this new type of technology? Do you have the right skills in place? What do you need to augment that? What are you willing to do to accelerate the benefits that can come from it? And then finally, how are you dealing with, sort of the negative things that could come from using these systems, in which, the data input may or may not be 100% visible to you, and you may not have complete control of it. So I think if you kind of use all those things, it gives you an opportunity to figure out, where are we? How mature are we? What are some of the best practices in the industry? How can we compare ourselves to our peers in the industry? Whether it's in your industry or just kind of at a technology level, comparing yourself against things that look interesting to you. So anyways, with that, I will wrap up. Hope everybody's doing well in terms of the month of January. Aaron and I will be doing a Cloud News of the Month later as February comes around. And again, we're going to do our best to be back at home and on the podcasting microphones, but appreciate everybody kind of bearing with any slight audio differences that we have between our normal setup in the Massive Cloudcast studios and kind of what Aaron and I are going through this month. Aaron is working through some health issues. He's got some sinus types of things, which will make him a little bit hacky and coughy and nasally. And I'm working on trying to be capable of traveling around without having to carry lots and lots of equipment. So anyways, hope everybody's doing well. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for telling a friend about the show. Hope you're enjoying the show so far in January. We've seen an uptick again this year. We really appreciate that. So thanks for listening. Thanks for giving us feedback in all the ways that you get your podcast. And with that, we'll wrap it up and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.